The prize-winning design from the International Super High-Rise Design Competition was plagiarized by his fiancée and his senior colleague. The gilded hexagonal badge bequeathed by his mentor was trampled into the mud by his father-in-law. On a rain-lashed night, he was thrown out of the firm he had built with his own hands. The last thing he heard was, "Your hands are no longer worthy of holding a pen." The winter rain in Jiangcheng, laced with chips of ice, slanted down through the smokestacks of the old industrial district. Lu Chun pushed a rusted chain-slipping share bike through the arched doorway of an abandoned workshop in the old cotton textile mill. He wore a faded gray work jacket, its cuffs frayed, a slightly darker patch sewn over the right shoulder. His pant legs were splattered with mud, and the canvas sneakers on his feet had split at the toe, held together by a thin twist of black wire. Strapped to the rear rack of the bike was a woven plastic sack, inside which were several rolls of drafting vellum, soaked through by the rain, their edges gone soft and limp. He rented a 300 yuan a month single room in a converted low-rent apartment in the old cotton mill on the west side of the city. The hallway smelled of mildew and coal smoke. Bare incandescent bulbs flickered on and off overhead, their dim light making the peeling walls look even more decrepit. His room was at the end of the hall, 11 square meters, an iron-framed bed, a desk nailed together from plywood, stacks of architectural journals and printed blueprints piled in the corner. The old desk lamp on the table still worked, its orange glow falling across dense hand-drawn lines, each one precise to the millimeter. Lu Chun peeled off his soaked work jacket and wrung it out. Water droplets hit the concrete floor with tiny soft sounds. He draped the jacket over the iron pipe at the head of the bed, sat down at the desk, and picked up a Rotring technical pen, continuing to draw a curve on a sheet of A1 drafting vellum. His hand was steady. No matter how cold, no matter how exhausted, as long as he held a pen, his hand never shook. This was something he had trained into himself over many years. Countless all-nighters spent drawing in the basement of Gu Chuetsin's office, drawing until calluses covered his fingers, drawing until his eyes burned and he could barely keep them open, but every line had to land exactly where it was supposed to. Gu Chuetsin had said that an architect's line is the bone of the building. If the bone is crooked, the building cannot stand. 3 months ago, his hand had held a very different pen. He had stood on the awards stage at the Dubai International Architecture Summit, accepting the gold prize in the City of the Future Super High-Rise Conceptual Design Competition as the lead designer on behalf of his team. The jury chairman had declared in his award speech that Lu Chen's proposal redefines the logic of wind environment response in super high-rise buildings, making the building no longer an adversary of the wind, but its dance partner. Camera flashes had erupted across the audience, and colleagues of every skin color had risen to their feet in applause. His fiancée Wen Wanqing had sat directly in the center of the front row, in an exquisitely tailored off-white dress, her smile elegant and restrained, her applause neither too fast nor too slow, each beat perfectly measured. 3 months later, no one remembered that pen. It had happened in September of the previous year. The global design competition for Jiangbei Province's new landmark, the Jianglan Center, had drawn top firms from 19 countries to bid. Lu Chen's independent team had fought their way to the final round with an ecological super high-rise proposal called Cloud Watchtower. The core of the proposal was a wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system, through annular air ducts and variable angle louvers distributed across all 4 facades of the tower. The force of high-altitude gales on the building was converted into the power to regulate the indoor-outdoor air pressure differential, while simultaneously driving the building's internal natural ventilation cycle. The jury chairman had said one thing during the final review: "This proposal has taught a building how to breathe." The night before the final round, when Wanqing had stayed up with him in his studio to adjust the model, she had worn his old dress shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair casually tied in a ponytail, standing behind him with a cup of hot coffee. She had set the coffee on the corner of his desk, bent over to watch him tweak a parameter on one of the curtain wall joints, the ends of her hair brushing his shoulder. She had said, "You must be the person who understands buildings best in all the world." When she said that, there had been light in her eyes. The next day at the competition, Lu Chun sat in the 3rd row, next to the aisle, waiting for his proposal to be projected onto the screen. The proposal that lit up the screen was indeed Cloud Watchtower. Every section, every joint detail, every rendering, all of it drawn stroke by stroke through countless sleepless nights. But the name of the design firm in the PowerPoint title bar read Wen Wanqing, and under her father Wen Bojun's name, Bojun International Architectural Design Group. Lu Chun rose from his seat. No one looked at him. The jury chairman announced that Bojun Group had won the design rights to Zhonglan Center by unanimous vote, praising the proposal as fully embodying the profound understanding of ecological super high-rise design by China's homegrown architects, and the most original and buildable design proposal in recent years, bar none. When Wanqing went up on stage to accept the award, she wore a sharply tailored white suit, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her heels striking the marble floor with crisp, confident clicks. She smiled like a blooming flower as she accepted the award certificate, thanking the jury for their recognition, thanking the team for their effort, thanking her father Wen Bojun for his meticulous cultivation, her voice carrying just the right measure of humility and emotion. Camera flashes exploded below, the shutter clicks dense as a rainstorm on a tin roof. Lu Chun stood in the very last row, arms at his sides. He watched the woman who had once worn his old shirts, carried the coffee he had brewed, fallen asleep beside him during his all-night modeling sessions, take everything he had ever created and claim it as her own. She did not look at him once. The entire time, her gaze swept from the stage over the audience countless times, and each time it precisely skipped the place where he stood. Late that night, he went to the One family villa to find Wen Wanqing. The rain was coming down in torrents, pounding the flagstone paths of the villa compound and exploding into white mist. He stood outside the iron gate for 2 hours. Rainwater streamed from his hair, blurring his vision. The One family housekeeper came out and handed him an umbrella, saying that Miss Wen did not want to see him. He stood for another hour. The iron gate finally opened. It was not Wen Wanqing who came out. It was Wen Bojun. Wen Bojun stood under the portico in a dark gray cashmere overcoat. The crystal chandelier behind him gilded his well-maintained silhouette, his polished leather shoes gleaming as they stood on the dry marble steps. He looked at Lu Chun in the rain, the corner of his mouth hooked in a faint, ambiguous curve. Not a smile, but the look of someone sizing up a thing they had already crushed underfoot and were about to grind down a little more. From his pocket, he pulled out a gilded bronze hexagonal badge engraved with an archaic character. Quebec. The badge gleamed dully under the light, its edges worn. The kind of wear that comes only from being rubbed between someone's fingers over and over again. This thing, that dead mentor of yours left it to you? When Bojun turned the badge over in his hand, examining it like a piece of flea market junk, his fingers casually toying with its edges. Gu Chuetsen, the father of international super high-rise ecological architecture. Too bad. He never took you as a disciple while he was alive. You just ran errands in his office for 3 years. And you think you can marry my daughter with this piece of junk? He hurled the badge to the ground. The gilded bronze emblem struck the flagstones, bounced twice, and rolled into a muddy puddle. The water was murky. The badge splashed down, sent up a few flecks of mud and slowly sank. The archaic character K was swallowed by the cloudy surface. Lu Chun, men like you aren't even worthy of carrying my daughter's shoes. Get lost. The iron gate slowly closed before Lu Chun. The hinges let out a heavy metallic groan. Kneeling in the rain, Lu Chun fished the badge out of the muddy water. He wiped the mud off with his palm and saw that a small chip of lacquer had been knocked off the character K, exposing the brass underneath. The brass gleamed faintly under the wash of rain. He rubbed his thumb over and over the chipped spot, then tucked the badge into the pocket closest to his chest. The pocket pressed against his ribs. The badge dug in cool and hard. He rose to his feet and turned away into the curtain of rain. He did not go back to his studio. The next day, when Bojun's people sealed the studio, 2 strips of paper, black text on white, pasted in a cross over the glass door, stamped with a bright red official seal. The stated reason: suspected infringement of trade secrets. All design files, model data, and client materials stored on his studio servers were copied and removed. The server hard drives were physically destroyed. Not formatted, but removed and smashed with a hammer. The fragments scattered across the floor. He went to find a lawyer, a man in his 50s who put on his reading glasses and flipped through the materials Lu Chan had brought, then took the glasses off, set them on the desk, and told him in a very tired voice that this case was unwinnable. The chain of evidence when Bojun held was perfectly watertight. Every signed design document bore the letterhead and seal of Bojun International, each one time-stamped, each seal stamped exactly where it needed to be. It was only then that Lu Chan understood. Over the past 3 months, under the pretext of helping to organize an archive, when Wanqing had systematically replaced the signature information on all his original files with the Bojun Group format. She had been meticulously thorough, the title block of every DWG file, the header and footer of every PDF, the layer names on every XREF file, even the backup records of historical versions. She had done it all. She had used the administrator password he had given her, logged into the core server of his studio. He had trusted her, given her every access right, including to the original design files that even his own assistant did not have permission to open. She had changed them one by one patiently, precisely over 90 days. 90 days was enough time to replace every occurrence of Lu Chan, on every line, every joint, every annotation with one Wanqing. And then she had driven the knife in. That deep night when he was thrown out of his own studio, he stood before the sealed glass door, and through the gap in the paper strips he saw on the desk inside the framed photograph of himself and Wen Wanqing. In the photo, the two of them stood side by side before the old site of Gu Chuetzen's office, smiling brilliantly. His mother, in their hometown in Bashu, received a call from the Wen family's lawyer. The voice on the other end informed her in an official tone that her son, Lu Chan, was being formally sued by Bojun International Architectural Design Group for suspected infringement of trade secrets, that he could face criminal liability, and that the amount involved was enormous. The old woman, who had coronary heart disease, collapsed on the spot at the words criminal liability, and was rushed by neighbors to the county hospital ICU. By the time Lu Chan made it back, it was 4:30 in the morning. The automatic doors of the ICU opened and closed before him. His mother had just been wheeled out of the emergency room, an oxygen mask still over her face, the wires of the cardiac monitor trailing from under the blanket to the machine on the nightstand, the green waveform on the screen jumping in steady beats. She gripped his hand, the 4 needle on the back of her hand pressed into his palm, cold and hard. Her lips were pale, her voice so faint he could barely hear it. "Chenner, Mama's fine. Mama believes you. Don't do anything bad." Lu Chan nodded. He said nothing else. He sat on a bench in the corridor outside the ICU all night, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting his hunched shadow against the stark white wall. After daybreak, he paid off his mother's hospital bill. It took the last 12,000 yuan in his bank account, exactly enough to cover the deposit and the first week of treatment. He asked the neighbor aunt to help look after her and called that aunt every day for updates. Then he returned to Jiangcheng. He changed his SIM card, deleting every contact in his phone associated with Bojun International or the Wen family. He rented that 11-square-meter room in the low-rent apartments at the old cotton mill and started looking for odd jobs at the construction labor market next door. Hauling cement, carrying rebar, cleaning up construction debris. 150 yuan a day, paid in cash. No one knew him. Everyone just knew that a quiet, brooding guy named Lu had shown up on the job site. He was quick and strong, but anyone could tell he wasn't born to manual labor. His form hauling cement was all wrong. He didn't use his lower back, just muscled through with his shoulders. By the end of the first day, the skin on his shoulders had rubbed raw, and blood had glued the fabric of his work jacket to the wounds. The foreman, Old Xing, once saw him drawing something on a cement bag. He leaned in and saw a hand-drawn architectural detail, a large-scale section of a double-skin ventilated curtain wall, perfectly proportioned, the lines as clean as a printed page. Old Xing crouched over that cement bag for a long time, then looked up at Lu Chan with a very complicated expression. "Xiao Lu, what did you do before this?" "Studied drafting for a few days." Old Xing didn't ask again. Jiangcheng was full of down-and-out people, and everyone had a past they couldn't talk about. He took off his own army overcoat and draped it over Lu Chen's shoulders, then stuffed an extra 20 yuan into his hand for overtime, saying it was getting cold, go buy something hot to eat. When Lu Chan took the money, he nodded, folded up the cement bag with the drawing on it, and tucked it into his canvas satchel. No one knew that this young man hauling cement was the youngest member of the Provincial Architectural Society. He had been admitted at 24, on the personal recommendation of Guchuetson himself. Even fewer people knew that Lu Chun had since the one family's moves 2 months before everything blew up. He was not a slow man. He had simply chosen to trust someone who was not worthy of trust. When he noticed Wan Wanqing starting to meet privately and frequently with his studio server administrator, he said nothing. He simply, quietly submitted patent applications in his own name for the 3 core technologies of his proposal: the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system, the vertical ecological circulation system, and the double-skin breathable insulation structure, through the International Patent Cooperation Treaty system. The filing date was a full 45 days earlier than the domestic patent applications later submitted by the Wan Bojun Group. The name he used for the applicant was not Lu Chun. It was a number engraved on the back of the badge Guchuetson had given him on his deathbed. That number corresponded to a trust fund Guchuetson had established in Vaduz, the capital of Liechtenstein, the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. Under the fund's name was a building technology patent company registered in Liechtenstein, specifically created to protect all of Guchuetson's completed and uncompleted design work from his lifetime. In his will, Guchuetson had left the entirety of the trust fund's assets to Lu Chun. That gilded bronze badge, the one Wan Bojun had trampled into the mud, was the sole instrument of that company. Without the badge, no one could access any patent, any drawing, any funds held under the fund's name. Guchuetson, the father of international super high-rise ecological architecture, recipient of the Pritzker Prize Lifetime Achievement Award, hailed by the Architectural Review as the last master of the 20th century. In his lifetime, he had led the design of 11 ecological super high-rise buildings over 300 meters tall across the globe, each one becoming a landmark on its city's skyline. He had no children, no family. In his later years, he saw his own reflection in the most silent, least socially adept young man in the office, the one who never took clients to dinner, never spoke at industry forums, never attended any design competition award ceremonies. The one who was simply the first to arrive at the office every morning and the last to leave every night, drawing until his fingers cramped, then soaking them in hot water and drawing more. In his will, Guchuetson had written one sentence: Lu Chun is one of the very few people in this profession who truly understands how a building breathes. I leave my name to him. Lu Chun had never made this will public. He locked the notarized document in the old camphor chest at his mother's house, the key hanging on a red string around his neck against his chest. He simply sewed the badge into the inner lining of his jacket, and continued working as an unremarkable designer on Wan Bojun's turf. Wan Bojun thought he was just a young man in the office who could draw fairly well. He had no idea that behind him stood a deceased giant. Now that unremarkable designer was crouched in the hallway of his low-rent apartment, eating a 6-yuan plate of stir-fried rice noodles under the glare of an incandescent bulb. The noodles were from Old Sun's stall at the mouth of the alley. He had paid an extra 50 cents for chili oil, and the heat made sweat bead on his forehead. He ate with utter focus as if performing a precision-timed task. Each mouthful chewed the exact same number of times, the next bite only picked up after the last was fully chewed. When he finished, he washed the disposable container, dried it with a rag and set it on the windowsill. He had accumulated over a dozen of these containers. Some he used to sort architectural model parts by size. Others held various material samples he had scavenged from construction sites, different grades of cement fragments, different gauges of rebar ends, different thicknesses of broken glass. He labeled each container with a marker, noting the number and date, and stacked them neatly in the corner, like a small materials laboratory. He went back to his desk and opened his old laptop with the cracked casing. He had bought it for 200 yuan at a second-hand market. It took 3.5 minutes to boot up, its cooling fan whining like a small plane about to take off. A fist-sized black blotch marred the lower right corner of the screen. He typed in a 42-character password, a mix of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and special symbols, with no pattern, and entered an encrypted interface. On the screen appeared the status pages of 3 PCT international patent applications. The title bar of each one displayed the words "Entered National Phase" in green. Patent rights had come into full legal force in 4 jurisdictions: China, the United States, the European Union, and Japan. The name of the patent holder was the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. With a registered address at an unremarkable gray office building in Vaduz, the location of the trust administrator Gu Chuetzen had personally selected during his lifetime. His reason for choosing that place was singular. Liechtenstein's laws protecting architectural intellectual property were the strictest in the world. He closed the patent page and opened another encrypted folder. Inside was the complete set of electronic construction drawings for the Wenbojun Group's Zhonglan Center project, over 1,300 drawings in total, covering every discipline from foundation to crown structure, every floor, every joint detail. These files had not been stolen. They had been uploaded by the Wenbojun Group itself to a cloud collaboration platform. Before leaving his studio, Liu Chun had left a hidden logging program on the server using his administrator account. Code he wrote himself under 200 lines but functional enough. All file uploads, downloads, modifications, and deletions were automatically timestamped and logged with the operator's IP address, then synced and backed up to his encrypted cloud drive. In other words, every single line Wenbojun now drew Liu Chun knew about. He even knew that one of Wenbojun's structural engineers had modified the bolt spacing on the 43rd floor air duct at 3:17 a.m. one night, changing it from 120 mm to 100 mm, and then 6 minutes later changing it back. He kept every bit of these granular revision logs. He flipped through the latest construction drawings, his fingers sliding over the touchpad page by page. When he reached a certain drawing, his fingers stopped. A faint, nearly imperceptible curve flickered at the corner of his mouth, so faint that if someone were watching his face, they likely wouldn't even catch it. Wenbojun had simplified the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system. He had cut a critical structural reinforcement belt, the very joint Liu Chun was most proud of in the entire proposal. Located at 1/3 and 2/3 the height of the tower, it consisted of 4 annular air ducts and 16 sets of variable angle aluminum alloy louvers, capable of maintaining aerodynamic stability in high-altitude gale conditions, while simultaneously using the wind pressure differential to drive the building's internal natural ventilation cycle. Wenbojun had axed 2 of the annular air ducts and reduced the louver sets from 16 to 8. This would save roughly 15% in construction costs, but the structure's lateral force resistance would drop by nearly 30%. This was Wenbojun's standard operating procedure. He was not an architect by training. He was a businessman. He didn't care how long a building could breathe. He cared how much cost he could save per square meter. And when Wan Qing, who understood the value of design better than her father, also understood how to steal someone else's design. So when she cut that structural belt, it was not out of cost considerations. She knew better than anyone that that particular joint belonged uniquely to Liu Chun, not something left by Gu Chuetzen, not something that could be looked up in a textbook, but something Liu Chun had developed himself, building on Gu Chuetzen's foundation. She cut it because no one at Bojun International could draw it. Not even her. The wind pressure calculations for that joint involved nonlinear fluid dynamics, and Liu Chun had used his own custom algorithm. That algorithm was stored on his laptop, and it was the one thing when Wan Qing, after copying his entire server, had failed to find, because it had never been on the server at all. Liu Chun shut the computer. The water on the coal briquette stove had come to a boil, the steam rattling the lid of the kettle. He made himself a cup of tea. The cheapest jasmine tea, more stems than leaves, but the fragrance was strong. As the scalding water hit, the scent of jasmine mingled with the coal smoke and filled the cramped room. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The clouds split open and moonlight streamed through the gap, falling on the mottled red brick wall of the abandoned workshop across the way. The wall still bore the faded production slogan from those days: cotton textiles for the workers and peasants. The washed-out red paint showed faintly in the moonlight. He picked up his phone and sent a message to a contact labeled Attorney Shen. Just 4 words. Attorney Shen, we can begin. Shin Duyun, senior partner at Jincheng Law Firm, one of the top attorneys in China specializing in architectural intellectual property. She had handled 17 major architectural design infringement cases, and won every single one. She was a woman who could make opposing counsel break into a cold sweat in the courtroom, her speech rapid, her logic airtight, never wasting a single word. 3 years ago, as Gu Chuetzen lay dying in the state hospital in St. Gallen, Switzerland, Shen Duyun was the only Chinese lawyer present. She personally witnessed Gu Chuetzin sign his name on the notarized will, his hand trembling slightly from the early stages of Parkinson's, but each stroke pressed down with immense force, as if he were pouring all his remaining strength into those pages. After signing, Gu Chuetzin set down the pen and said one thing to her. "Attorney Shen, I owe my mother an apology. This inheritance is not for Lu Chan. It is repayment." Shen Duyun did not ask what he meant. She simply nodded and placed the notarized document into her briefcase. She had waited 3 years for this day. 1 week later, Beijing International Convention Center, the China International Super High-Rise Building Forum, was being held in the main banquet hall on the 3rd floor. This was the highest-profile annual gathering in the domestic architecture industry, attended by the heads of every top design institute, the academic leaders of university architecture departments, officials from the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development's Science and Technology Division, and reporters from dozens of architectural media outlets. The main hall had a capacity of 800, but over 1,000 had shown up, forcing the organizers to add 2 extra rows of folding chairs in the aisles. The theme of this year's forum was Green Transformation and Technological Innovation in Super High-Rise Buildings. The theme had been set 2 months prior by the Ministry's Science and Technology Division. At the time, no one thought it was anything special. Green building had been the talk of every forum for years. It wasn't until when Bojun, in his opening remarks, announced that Bojun International would officially launch the Cloud Watchtower system at this very forum, calling it the world's first super high-rise ecological building based on a wind pressure adaptive curtain wall, that they realized the theme had been tailor-made for one man. When Bojun sat in the exact center of the 2nd row of the VIP section, his suit impeccably tailored, the dark navy fabric gleaming faintly under the lights. His tie had been chosen by his daughter Wen Wanqing, a dark red Hermes tied in a Windsor knot. He was the keynote speaker at this forum, and the title of his speech was Breakthroughs and the Future of China's Independently Developed Super High-Rise Ecological Architecture. According to the agenda, he would formally announce during his speech that the Cloud Watchtower system was entering the construction drawing detailing phase, and would unveil a technical system for the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall that he claimed was entirely independently developed. He had spent 3 full months on the PowerPoint for this, filled with exquisite 3D architectural animations and wind tunnel test data charts, even hiring a Swiss visualization firm to produce a 45-second tower wind environment simulation animation, at a cost of 400,000 yuan. When Wanqing was not sitting beside him, her seat was in the front row, next to the aisle beside a deputy director from the ministry. She wore a navy blue business suit with light makeup and held a notebook, occasionally looking down to scribble a few words, appearing to take notes on the forum's key points, but in reality she was just drawing the same pattern over and over on the paper, a hexagon. She knew Lu Chun would come today. The afternoon before, her phone had received a text from an unknown number. No signature, just a single line. "Tomorrow at the forum. I will be there. Lu Chun." She had read that text many times, then deleted it. She did not tell Wen Bojun. When Bojun took the stage, the applause was warm and sustained. He had spent 30 years cultivating connections in the architecture world, and his network ran deep. At least a third of the people in the room had done business with him. He stood at the podium, smiling and nodding to the audience below, his posture relaxed and confident. He cleared his throat and began his speech. From the global development trends in super high-rise buildings, to China's technological breakthroughs in ecological architecture, to the R&D investments Bojun International had made over the past 5 years, he spent a full 15 minutes laying the groundwork, packaging his group as an innovative enterprise that had always stood at the forefront of technology. Then he used the remote to advance the PowerPoint to slide 27. The screen displayed a 3D sectional view of the Cloud Watchtower tower, with the 4 facades color-coded to show the distribution of the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system. A few low murmurs of admiration came from the audience, and several people raised their phones to take photos. "Everyone, please look. This is the Cloud Watchtower wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system, independently developed by Bojun International over 3 years. This system achieves a dynamic response to the high-altitude wind environment through annular air ducts and variable-angle louvers distributed across all 4 facades of the tower. When wind speeds exceed 15 meters per second, the system automatically closes the louvers on the windward face while opening the exhaust vents on the leeward face, using the wind pressure differential to drive the building's internal natural ventilation cycle. This technology was developed entirely from scratch by our own team and possesses complete independent intellectual property rights. He advanced to slide 42, a comparative wind tunnel test data chart. The bar graph showed that the cloud watchtower system improved lateral force resistance by 37% over conventional curtain wall systems under simulated Category 12 typhoon conditions. He had put considerable effort into generating this data, not by fabricating it but by selectively presenting it. He had used the most favorable experimental conditions, the most ideal wind direction angle, the most conservative control group parameters, to make the data look beautiful. But he had deliberately omitted one critical piece of information. This performance could only be achieved with all 4 annular air ducts operational and all 16 louver sets functioning normally. And his construction drawings had already cut 2 of those air ducts. In other words, there was an unbridgeable chasm between the performance data he was showing everyone and his actual product. The people in the room did not know this. They simply looked at that beautiful bar graph and nodded approvingly. Someone wrote the words wind pressure adaptive in their notebook and drew a circle around it. 50 minutes into the speech, when Bojun advanced to the final slide, the screen displayed the Bojun International logo and a tagline, "Bringing Chinese architecture to the world." Smiling, he clicked off his laser pointer, placed both hands on the podium, and opened the floor for questions. His posture was relaxed, like an actor taking his curtain call after a brilliant performance, waiting for the flowers and applause. A few hands went up in the front rows. When Bojun called on a middle-aged man in the third row, an old acquaintance from the Provincial Housing and Construction Department. They had collaborated many times, sharing an unspoken understanding. The man stood and asked a soft question. President 1, when can the cloud watchtower system be formally applied to an actual project? Our province happens to be planning a new landmark project. When Bojun smiled and replied that discussions were already underway with several local governments, and that he expected breakthrough progress by the following year. His tone was assured and modest, perfectly calibrated. A few more hands went up in the back. When Bojun's gaze swept the room, he was just about to call on a reporter in the front row, one he had arranged in advance, the questions already rehearsed twice. But in that moment, he saw that in the back corner, one person had not raised his hand. He had simply stood up. The man was wearing a faded gray work jacket, the cuffs frayed, his sneakers still carrying traces of unwashed mud. He walked down the aisle. His pace was unhurried, but each step landed with utter steadiness, as if walking a path he had walked countless times before. When the light hit his face, when Bojun's smile froze. It was Lu Chun. His hair was shorter than 3 months ago. The lines of his face were harder, his cheekbones sharply outlined by the light. There was light stubble on his chin, but it didn't make him look unkempt. Rather, it made him look even more like someone who could not be ignored. Every eye in the room locked onto him. A few people recognized him and let out low gasps. The architectural media reporters in the back rows started frantically pressing their shutters. Their professional instincts told them that the biggest news today was not when Bojun's PowerPoint. When Wan Qing in the front row stopped writing the hexagon she had drawn countless times, the last stroke dragged long across the paper, tearing through it. Lu Chun stopped in the middle of the aisle. He did not look at Wan Qing. He simply took the microphone from the moderator's hand and held it in one hand. The mic was a bit heavy, but his grip was steady. President 1, I am Lu Chun. His voice carried through the sound system, filling the entire banquet hall. Not too loud, not too soft, neither fast nor slow, like the statement of an established fact that had already come to pass. The wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system you just displayed in your presentation. Could you elaborate on which architect the original design originated from? The entire hall went silent in an instant. It was not the gradual fading of noise, but as if someone had suddenly pulled the power cord on the sound system. Every whisper, every rustle of notebook pages, every glow of a phone screen vanished in the same split second. Only the low hum of the air conditioning vents remained, and the crisp sound of someone in the back row accidentally knocking their coffee cup against their saucer. When Bojun's hand tightened around the laser pointer, his knuckles going white. Behind him, the PowerPoint still frozen on the final slide. The Bojun International logo and the tagline, bringing Chinese architecture to the world, glaring under the projector's harsh light. He recovered his composure quickly. Decades of business experience had trained in him an instinctive response to unexpected situations. He smiled faintly into the microphone, his voice still rich and resonant. Sir, the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall is a core technology independently developed by Bojun International, completed by myself and my team. If you have questions about the technical details, you may contact our technical department after the session. This is the Q&A period, and I suggest you give the opportunity to other guests with more constructive questions. He had spoken flawlessly, neither admitting nor denying anything, and the word sir had deliberately drawn a line of distance, as if he did not even know Lu Chan. A few people in the audience nodded in agreement, probably thinking this young man who had appeared out of nowhere simply didn't know his place. Lu Chan did not give him that opening. Fine. Then I'll change the question. He lowered the microphone and pulled the first document from his canvas satchel. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a surgeon laying out sterilized instruments on an operating table. He held the document up and opened it to the first page, making sure everyone in the room could see the World Intellectual Property Organization emblem on the cover, the blue globe with a line of English and a line of French below it. This is a PCT International Patent Grant Notification. The patent title: A Wind Pressure Adaptive Curtain Wall System for Super High-Rise Buildings. The filing date was 137 days ago. The patent holder is the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. The plenipotentiary representative of the patent holder, he paused, is me. The room went silent. Not the confused silence from before, but the stunned silence of a room that had just been struck by something. It was a silence filled with the sound of sharply indrawn breaths, of fingers digging into armrests, of reporters in the back row frantically adjusting their camera focus. Several directors of design institutes in the front row simultaneously turned to the person next to them, their eyes all asking the same question: what did he just say? Lu Chan flipped the patent document to the third page, which bore the filing date and the full information of the patent holder. He held the document a little higher so those in the back could see as well. This patent covers the most core curtain wall structural design of the Cloud Watchtower proposal, including the geometric parameters of the annular air ducts, the angle control algorithm for the variable louvers, and the complete technical pathway for wind pressure differential-driven, natural ventilation. The filing date of the PCT patent preceded the filing date of Bojun International's domestic patent application by a full 45 days. He paused, lowered the patent document, and in a tone of absolute calm, asked the question that instantly soaked the back of Wen Bojun's shirt in cold sweat. President 1, could you explain how a domestic patent filed 45 days after ours could independently develop a technical system that was already covered by a PCT International patent 45 days before it? Wen Bojun's face went bloodlessly pale in that instant. Not just ordinary pale, but the ashen gray of a man who had been drained of all blood and then dusted with ashes. Behind him, the giant screen still froze on the Bojun International logo, the brand identity he had spent 8 years cultivating, now pinned to the wall like a signed confession. People in the audience began to shift restlessly. Several directors of design institutes in the front row put their heads together. One of them directly opened his laptop and began searching in the patent database. His hands moved fast. Clearly someone very familiar with patent search systems. In under 20 seconds, he had pulled up the PCT patent number Lu Chan had just cited. He stared at the full patent text that popped up on his screen for a moment, then removed his glasses, wiped them on the hem of his jacket, put them back on and read it again. He turned to the person beside him and murmured something, his voice so low that only those within 2 or 3 rows could hear. But in a room so silent you could hear a pin drop. That was enough. It's real. The filing date is indeed 45 days before Wen Bojun's. The patent holder's address is in Liechtenstein. Nothing to do with Wen Bojun at all. The person next to him immediately pulled out his phone and started sending messages. Word spread from 1 to 10, from 10 to 100. In less than 3 minutes, Nearly everyone in the hall knew that Lu Chan was telling the truth. Some heard it from whispered relays from their neighbors, some searched the patent number on their own phones, some received WeChat screenshots from colleagues outside the venue. The patent search page clearly listed the complete information for those 3 patents: patent title, filing date, patent holder, inventor. The inventor column bore Lu Chen's name. The patent holder column bore the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. The dates were 45 days earlier than when Bojunt's domestic applications. Every item was public, searchable, and immutable. The forum reporters reacted even faster. They surged up from the back rows, cameras and microphones aimed at the patent document in Lu Chen's hand. Shutters clattered in a continuous roar, flashbulbs turning the banquet hall into the scene of an explosion. Some were on the phone to their newsrooms, their voices low but rapid, their fingers flying over phone screens, already drafting a breaking news alert with a single-line headline. Breaking. Bojunt International's Cloud Watchtower design suspected of international patent infringement. PCD patent holder publicly challenges at forum. When Bojunt gripped the podium, his legs trembling faintly beneath the tablecloth. The cloth was thick, hiding his legs, but it couldn't hide the fine beads of sweat seeping from his temples. He cleared his throat, and his voice suddenly spiked, taking on the shrill edge of a man backed into a corner. This is slander. The Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund, the elder Mr. Gu Chuetzen, was indeed a senior figure I respect. And I respect his contributions to China's architectural enterprise. But he passed away many years ago. This fund has never had any public activity. No one in the industry even knew of its existence. This man cannot possibly be any plenipotentiary representative. He was just an errand boy in Gu Chuetzen's office. He's never even drawn a complete set of construction drawings. He's forging documents and disrupting the order of this forum. Security. Remove him. 2 security guards entered from the side door. Black uniforms, walkie-talkies at their belts, their strides brisk and forceful. They reached Lu Chan and were just about to reach for him. From the rear of the hall, a steady female voice rang out. It wasn't loud, but its penetration was immense, like a meticulously sharpened blade slicing through the stagnant air. That document is genuine. Everyone turned. A woman in a dark navy suit, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, rose from the very last row. She was tall and stood ramrod straight, a black briefcase in her hand. Her high heels struck the marble floor with crisp, steady clicks, each step landing on a precise beat. She walked the entire length of the banquet hall aisle, past row after row of people, every eye following the movement of her back. She stopped beside Lu Chan and turned to face the entire room, her gaze sweeping across every face with a calm, razor-edged force. I am Shun Duyun, senior partner at Jincheng Law Firm, and the global executor of Mr. Gu Chuetzen's will. 3 years ago, as Mr. Gu Chuetzen lay dying in the state hospital in St. Gallen, Switzerland, he personally signed the notarized will. I was present to witness the entire process. According to that will, Mr. Gu Chuetzen left all assets, including the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund, along with all his completed and uncompleted design work, all technical patents, and all copyrights to his academic writings entirely to Lu Chan. The complete scanned copy of the notarized will can be viewed right now in the public database of the Liechtenstein Commercial Register. If you don't believe me, take out your phones now and visit the official page of the Liechtenstein Commercial Register. She rattled off a precise registration number, down to the last digit. Her speech was rapid, her enunciation crisp, every number bitten off with absolute clarity. A few seconds of silence. Then someone was the first to pull up the official page of the Liechtenstein Commercial Register, a fully public database that anyone, anywhere could access. They typed the registration number Shinduyan had just given into the search box and pressed enter. The page displayed a scanned copy of an English-language registration document. The header bore the emblem of the Liechtenstein Commercial Register. The body text stated clearly, sole beneficiary of the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund, Lu Chan. Plenipotentiary representative, Lu Chan. The registration date was 3 years ago, earlier than the first line of the Cloud Watchtower proposal had ever been drawn on paper. He held up his phone to show the people around him. They, in turn, showed people further away. Word spread from 1 to 10, from 10 to 100. In less than 2 minutes, at least half the people in the hall were looking at that registration document on their own phone screens. Someone took a screenshot and posted it to an industry WeChat group. The architects in the group started flooding the chat, messages popping up one after another. The Tianke Fund actually exists. It was registered 3 years ago. The beneficiary is Lu Chun. It says it right there. Didn't Wen Bojun just say this fund had never had any public activity? A fund registered 3 years ago counts as never had any public activity? So who's the one lying? The giant screen behind Wen Bojun suddenly switched to a new image. Not Wen Bojun's PowerPoint. Not the Bojun International logo. It was a new projection, switched over in the back by the forum's technical support team. 2 hours before the forum began, Lu Chun, through Shen Duyun's connections, had held a brief communication with the organizers' technical support team. Shen Duyun, representing the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund, had submitted a formal presentation application to the forum organizers. The legal documents attached to the application included the PCT patent grant notification, the Liechtenstein Commercial Register Trust Fund Registration Certificate, and the notarized copy of Gu Chuetzen's will. After reviewing these documents, the organizers' legal department made a decision to grant the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund a 5-minute on-site presentation slot during the forum agenda. They had not informed Wen Bojun in advance. This was the forum organizers' own decision. They did not want a forum they hosted to later be accused of providing a platform for an infringer. On the screen appeared high-resolution scanned copies of 2 documents. The first was a photocopy of Gu Chuetzen's original conceptual sketch for the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall, presented at an international architecture forum many years ago. In the lower right corner of the sketch was Gu Chuetzen's personal signature and the date, the handwriting carrying the characteristic micro-tremor of early Parkinson's, but every line drawn with absolute steadiness, every annotation clear and neat. The second was the complete set of Lu Chen's original hand-drawn drawings for the Cloud Watchtower proposal, completed at Wen Bojun's firm 2 years ago. Not the doctored version. This was the photocopy he had frantically made the night before he was expelled from his studio and hidden under his mother's hospital pillow. Every page was dated. Every joint was fully documented. On the most critical drawing, the wind pressure curtain wall system section, was Lu Chen's signature in the lower right corner, dated 2 years ago. Nearly 2 full years before Wen Bojun's domestic patent application. The projection juxtaposed the 2 documents on the giant screen. On the left was Gu Chuetzen's conceptual sketch from many years ago. On the right was Lu Chen's hand-drawn detailing from 2 years ago. In the center was the Cloud Watchtower curtain wall structure Wen Bojun had just displayed in his PowerPoint presentation. 3 images placed side by side like 3 specimens under a microscope. The structural logic was completely consistent. The handling of key joints followed the same lineage. Even the dimensional annotations of certain details were identical. The air in the entire banquet hall was vacuumed out in that instant. No one spoke. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seat. In the back row, a young reporter's audio recorder slipped from his faintly trembling fingers and landed on the carpet with a muffled thud. He didn't even bend down to pick it up. Wen Bojun stood frozen at the podium, his mouth opening and closing, opening and closing. The composure and dignity he had meticulously maintained for 30 years was torn to shreds on that giant screen. He took a half step back unconsciously, his hip striking the edge of the podium with a sharp pain, but he didn't seem to feel it at all. In the front row sat a white-haired old expert, an academician of the Chinese Academy of Engineering, the former dean of the College of Architecture and Urban Planning at Tongji University, a titan in the field of super high-rise structural design in China, 78 years old. The old man wore a faded Zhongshan suit, an old-fashioned fountain pen clipped in his breast pocket. He removed his reading glasses and looked at Wen Bojun with a gaze of profound disappointment. There was no anger in that look, no shock, only a deep, pure disappointment. The look of a teacher seeing a student in whom he had once placed great hopes turn in a plagiarized paper. He rose to his feet. His movements were slow, but he stood very straight. His voice was not loud, but in a hall so silent you could hear your own heartbeat, everyone heard him clearly. Young man, that Cloud Watchtower proposal of yours, back when I reviewed it, I gave it the highest score. I still haven't figured out how such a brilliant proposal just up and became someone else's. After speaking, he did not sit back down. Instead, he turned toward where Luchan stood and gave a very slight nod. The nod was small, but every person in the room understood its meaning. It was the recognition of one architect by another. Heavier than any applause on any awards stage. A low, dense murmur rippled through the hall. Not loud but intense, like distant thunder before a storm. Shen Duyun stepped forward from beside Luchan and took the microphone. Her voice was cool and cutting, every word carrying the precise weight of a legal document. I formally announce the following 3 items on behalf of the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. First, this morning, the fund formally issued a legal demand letter to Bojun International Architectural Design Group regarding the intellectual property infringement of the Cloud Watchtower proposal. The full text of the letter has been simultaneously copied to the National Intellectual Property Administration and the Zhongbei Provincial Department of Housing and Urban Rural Development. Second, this morning, we also submitted an application for administrative adjudication of patent infringement to the National Intellectual Property Administration, requesting a formal investigation into Bojun International's unauthorized use of PCT patented technology. Third, she paused, her gaze sweeping the room. In her eyes was an undisguised force. The force of a lawyer finally speaking on behalf of a client who had remained silent for 3 years. In accordance with the explicit wishes expressed in Mr. Guchuetsen's will, the Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund will officially launch the Tianke Young Architects Support Initiative today. Each year, we will fund 10 independent architects to complete PCT international patent filings, with all costs covered by the fund. In his will, Mr. Gu wrote, "An architect's pen should not be broken by capital. Let buildings breathe. Let truth stand." The conference was forced to adjourn when Bojun, surrounded by security, hurriedly exited through a side door. His steps so unsteady he nearly tripped. A large patch of sweat had soaked through the back of his dark navy suit. His tie was askew, his hair, once meticulously combed, had fallen apart. A swarm of reporters carrying video cameras chased him relentlessly, their flashbulbs exploding in the corridor, illuminating the beads of sweat on his temples and his stumbling silhouette, barely kept upright by his assistant. One young reporter, chasing closest, practically shoved his microphone into Bojun's shoulder, shouting, "President 1, the PCT patent filing date predates your domestic application by 45 days. How do you respond?" Bojun gave no answer. His assistant reached out to block the lens. The camera was knocked askew, the footage lurching violently before freezing on the final frame of Bojun's back vanishing behind the elevator doors. Wanqing sat motionless in the front row. The notebook in her hands lay open, the page covered in drawn hexagons now crumpled in her grip. She didn't stand. She didn't chase after her father. She didn't look back at Luchan. She simply sat there, a statue nailed to the spot. Her phone vibrated in her bag several times. She didn't answer. The deputy director from the ministry who had been sitting beside her had left his seat at some unknown moment, leaving only an empty chair and half a cup of cold tea on the table. Luchan left the hall from a different direction. He did not look at Bojun's wretched retreating back, nor at Wanqing's frozen profile. His gaze rested on those old experts in the front row who had stood to applaud him. Besides academician Chen, 4 others had risen to their feet as well. A retired professor from the School of Architecture at South China University of Technology, the former chief engineer of the China Southwest Architectural Design Institute, 2 senior consultants from the China Architecture Design and Research Group. Those 5 people combined had spent over 2 centuries in the architecture profession. They had all stood and applauded simultaneously for a young man who had been expelled from this industry 3 months ago. That scene was captured by a reporter in the back row and later became the cover photo for every architectural media outlet's headline that day. The composition of the photo was simple: 5 white-haired old men standing in the front row, facing a young man in a gray work jacket in the back, their hands meeting over their chests. The young man's face was half lit by the stage lights, the other half hidden in shadow, his expression impossible to read. Luchan pushed through the revolving door at the back of the hall and entered the corridor. Behind him came the sound of Shen Duyun's high heels striking the marble floor. Crisp, steady, rhythmic, like a precision clockwork wound to the fullest. She caught up to him, pushed her gold-rimmed glasses up her nose, and a rare smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not a professional smile, but the genuine smile of someone who had waited too long and finally seen the result. Lu-chan, the first shot is fired. The effect exceeded my expectations. When Bojun's lawyer called my work phone 10 minutes ago, wanting to discuss a settlement, I hung up on him. She fell into step beside him, pulling out her phone to show him a call log. The incoming number labeled Bojun International Legal Director. The call duration showing 0 seconds, meaning she hadn't picked up at all. Then he called a second time. I still didn't answer. The third call came through the firm's front desk, and the receptionist transferred it to me. When Bojun himself was on the line, he said terms are negotiable. Bojun International is willing to relinquish all rights to the Cloud Watchtower project, acknowledge your patent rights, issue a public apology, and the compensation amount is also negotiable. The only condition: you do not sue Wen Wanqing for her infringing acts. That way, Wen Wanqing can keep her architect's license. Lu-chan stopped walking. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the corridor, the first snow of the capital was falling thick and fast, dyeing the traffic on Chang'an Avenue into a flowing river of white. The snowflakes were large and dense, melting into droplets the moment they touched the glass, sliding down and leaving thin, trailing streaks. He was silent for a few seconds. Then he pulled from his canvas satchel a Rotring technical pen, the pen he had used for 6 years, its scale markings worn smooth, the red ring logo on the cap faded to a barely visible outline. He spun the pen once through his fingers, the motion light and practiced, like a seasoned craftsman toying with his most trusted tool. Attorney Shen, pass one message back to Wen Bojun for me. Go ahead. Give me back my pen. He tucked the pen back into the inner pocket of his satchel and zipped it shut. That's all. Shen Duyun was silent for a few seconds. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the white light of the snow casting a faint glow across her gold-rimmed glasses. She looked at Lu-chan and nodded. She didn't say understood. She didn't say okay. She didn't say any superfluous word. She just nodded, then pulled a voice recorder from her briefcase and pressed the stop button. This was a professional habit she had cultivated at the firm. All communications with clients regarding settlement terms were recorded and archived in full. The words Lu-chan had just spoken. Give me back my pen. Just 4 words, clean and absolute, free of any ambiguity, needing no explanation. No settlement. No deal. No forgiveness. The way that pen had been taken was too filthy. Any form of settlement would be a second desecration. It was not an ordinary pen. It was the pen an architect had picked back up under a bare incandescent bulb in a corridor apartment, after being plagiarized, slandered, and thrown out of the firm he had built with his own hands. It represented everything that should never be broken by capital. News of the Beijing Forum swept through the entire architecture world that very afternoon. It didn't spread slowly. It spread like a virus at terrifying speed. The headlines of every major architectural media outlet were replaced. Bojun International's Cloud Watchtower design accused of plagiarism. Peath patent holder presents full evidence chain at forum. Tianke Fund registered 3 years ago. When Bojun's claim of never any public activity slapped down on the spot. Guqiwetsons will exposed. All intellectual property left to Lu-chan. 5 academician-level experts stand and applaud Lu-chan at forum. The headlines grew longer and more explosive. Every architecture-related WeChat group, Weibo feed, and social media circle was discussing the same thing. When Bojun's phone rang off the hook, long-standing clients, the owners of 3 ongoing construction projects, all called within the first hour demanding emergency meetings. Their tones were polite but their messages were hard. Until the intellectual property issues were clarified, all cooperation was suspended. 5 new projects currently under negotiation, the largest of them a 4 billion yuan deal. All sent written notices that afternoon, their phrasing tactful but their meaning clear. In light of the current public opinion and legal risks facing your company, we have decided to postpone signing and will revisit the matter once the situation is clarified. Even the 3 industry associations where he served as a director called to inquire about the situation, their tones cautiously probing, but between the lines they were all asking the same question. President 1, can you still continue to serve as director? When Bojun didn't answer a single call, his secretary set his phone to silent. New message alerts kept popping up on the screen, piling one on top of another until the contact icons were completely obscured. His unread WeChat messages climbed from 99 plus to 300 plus to 600 plus, the red number ticking upward like a countdown timer on a bomb. He sat behind the expensive rosewood desk in his office. On the desk lay the forum program booklet, its cover still bearing his photo and the title of his speech. He flipped the booklet over with his fingers, the photo face down on the desk. When Wanqing's phone also rang incessantly. Her number wasn't public, but the architecture world was only so big. Someone always knew someone. She answered one call. It was an old undergraduate classmate, now a project architect at a foreign design firm. The voice on the other end was cautiously probing, like someone speaking to an old friend who had suddenly become a stranger. Wanqing, is what happened at the forum true? What Lu Chan said, the PCT patents, the Liechtenstein Trust Fund, Gu Chuetzen's will. All of it's true. You always told us your dad independently developed everything, and now online everyone's saying you plagiarized Lu Chen's proposal, that you even copied Gu Chuetzen's sketches. What exactly? When Wanqing hung up before she could finish, she pressed the power button, and the phone screen went black. She set it on the vanity screen down and sat there for a long time. The drawer of the vanity was half open. Inside was a Rotring technical pen, the same model as the one in Lu Chen's satchel. Lu Chen had given it to her 3 years ago. 2 tiny letters were engraved on the barrel, LC. She had never used it to draw a single thing. It had just sat in the drawer. She looked at the pen. Her hand reached out, hovered in the air for a long time, and in the end she did not touch it. A week after the events in Beijing, Lu Chen found a letter from Switzerland in the old mailbox at the cotton mill apartment. It was sent by the trust administrator of the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund. The address on the envelope was handwritten in English, the stamp bearing the national emblem of Liechtenstein. He tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter Gu Chuetzen had personally written to Lu Chen before his death. The paper was pale yellow, aged, the edges slightly brittle. The handwriting was vigorous yet faintly trembling, the characteristic tremor of early Parkinson's, but every stroke was exquisitely controlled, turning the tremor itself into a kind of strength in the line, just like the architectural drawings he had once made. Lu Chen, by the time you read this letter, you will have already won the first battle on my behalf. You were the most silent young man I ever met in the office, and the one who least needed words to prove himself. When other young men drew a good picture, they wanted the whole world to know. When you drew a good picture, you simply folded it neatly and placed it on my desk, then turned around and started the next one. I knew then that your roots run deeper than most people's. From foundation to topping out, the most important part of a building is not the member that grows the fastest but the deepest pile. You are that pile. This letter is the last drawing I leave you. The buildings that come after, you draw them yourself. Lu Chen folded the letter back along its original creases, put it back in the envelope, and placed the envelope in the inner pocket of his canvas satchel, in the same compartment as the Rotring pen. He zipped it shut, sat on the edge of the bed, hands braced on his knees, head lowered in silence for a long time. In the hallway, the incandescent bulb flickered once as the voltage dipped, then steadied. His shadow on the wall shuddered and steadied with it. That evening he rode the share bike to the construction site on the east side of the city. Old Xing was directing the workers unloading the last truckload of rebar. When he saw Lu Chen, he grinned, flashing a mouthful of yellow teeth. "Xiao Lu, what are you doing here so late? There was no work this afternoon. I had little Wang unload that truck of cement for you. The pay's still yours." Lu Chen pulled a bottle of erguata liquor from his satchel and pressed it into Old Xing's hands. Old Xing blinked, looked down at the bottle, then back up at Lu Chen. "What's with the generosity, kid? You strike it rich." "No. I just wanted to have a drink with you." Old Xing tucked the bottle into his coat, clapped him on the shoulder, and didn't ask anything more. 2 months later, Bojun International Architectural Design Group formally filed for bankruptcy protection in court. The final straw that broke the camel's back was not the Beijing Forum incident itself, but the chain reaction it triggered. 7 ongoing project clients unilaterally terminated their contracts within 2 weeks. Not a single one formally canceled by letter. All of them first called to politely say the project was temporarily postponed, then immediately followed up with an email giving formal notice of termination. 3 banks froze his lines of credit, the largest of them writing 4 words in the remarks column of the freeze notice: risk alert. For projects that had already passed design review were halted by planning departments, the stated reason being re-verification of the integrity and legality of intellectual property required. One of them was a civic center in a prefecture-level city in Gyeongbei Province, a project into which Won Bo-jun had poured nearly 2 years of effort. He had even obtained the planning permit. Only the construction permit remained. The letter from the City Planning Bureau was extremely concise, only 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph read, "Given that your firm suspected infringement of third-party intellectual property rights in the Jonglan Center project has been widely reported in the media, our Bureau deems it necessary to conduct an intellectual property compliance review of the design outcomes for all projects under your firm's name, whether under construction or pending. Until the review conclusions are issued, the processing of all related administrative permits is suspended." The implication behind that letter was something Won Bo-jun understood better than anyone. No local government wanted its name tied to a design group suspected of infringement. Won Bo-jun sat in his office all night. He went through the mountain of documents piled on his desk one by one, the termination letters, the credit freeze notices, the official orders halting his projects, the thick stack of legal response materials sent by his lawyer, then leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and stayed that way until daylight filled the window. The next morning he signed. On the final page of the bankruptcy protection application, his hand was shaking when he wrote his name. When Wanqing's architect's license was suspended pending investigation by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development. The structural safety assessment report for the Cloud Watchtower curtain wall that she had signed was reviewed by an independent third-party inspection agency, commissioned by the Provincial Housing Department. The review found that the calculations for a critical joint had been artificially simplified. To support her father's decision to eliminate 2 of the annular air ducts, she had, in the safety assessment report, reduced the wind pressure redundancy factor Lu Chun had originally designed from 1.8 to 1.2, barely scraping past the minimum code requirements. But Lu Chun's original design was 1.8, because the probability of 4 air ducts failing simultaneously was far lower than the probability of 2 air ducts failing simultaneously. The redundancy factor must increase as the system's complexity decreases. When Wanqing had not only lowered the redundancy factor, she had also deliberately obscured the calculation process for this item in the report, making it appear on the surface to still meet the code. After 3 days of repeated verification, the review agency's experts wrote 4 words on the report: suspected of fraud. The day she received the investigation notice, she sat alone in the top-floor office of Bojun International. Outside the window was the skyline of Gyeongchung, where she had once grandly planned to build a tower even taller than the Jonglan Center. Those towers were still there, but she was no longer worthy of drawing them. She suddenly remembered that deep night when Lu Chun had been drawing in the corridor of the apartment building. He had been hand-drafting the wind pressure distribution diagram for that structural reinforcement belt, drawing, revising, drawing again, agonizing for over 4 hours just to get the curvature radius of the air duct cross-section precise to 1 decimal place. She had been sitting next to him, painting her nails, and without even looking up she had said, "That joint is too complicated. Simplify it. It doesn't match our detailing capabilities." Lu Chun hadn't argued. He had simply erased the curve and drawn it again. Now she understood. It wasn't complicated. It was expertise. She had taken the expertise someone had bled to hone and treated it like an unnecessary burden. She didn't contact Lu Chun. She knew that number had been blocked. She had tried calling once 3 months ago, and heard the cold automated message. "The number you have dialed is currently busy." She had tried 5 times and every time it was the same. Then she understood. It wasn't currently busy. Her number had been blacklisted. She sat in that vast, empty office, the city outside the window lighting up with a million lights, but her phone screen never lit up again. Half a year later, the Gyeongbei Provincial Department of Housing and Urban Rural Development announced the reopening of the design rights bidding for the Jonglan Center project. This time, the bidding announcement included a brand new qualification review clause, the wording of which Shan Duyan had personally helped draft. Bidders must possess complete independent intellectual property rights for the submitted proposal. Where PCT international patents are involved, patent grant certification must be provided. For any technology used in the proposal that involves third-party intellectual property rights, legally valid authorization documents must be provided. Proposals with disputed intellectual property rights will not be accepted. There was only one architectural firm in all of Jiangbei province that met this condition. Tianke Architectural Design Office, wholly established by the Liechtenstein Tianke Architectural Heritage Fund, registered at a 3-story red brick building converted from the old cotton textile mill, just 2 alleys away from the 11-square-meter low-rent apartment where Lu Chun had once lived. Chief Architect, Lu Chun. On the day the office opened, not many people came, but every single one was sincere. Old Xing arrived wearing his only clean shirt, the collar starched and pressed, though he couldn't get used to it and kept tugging at the neck. He was carrying a case of erguotu, which he set down at the entrance of the office. Xiao Lu, the crew pitched in for this. It ain't much. Save it for when you got guests. Old Sun brought a steaming basket of brown sugar steamed buns his wife had made, still hot, wrapped in a towel, the steam leaking through the gaps in the cloth. He said Lu Chun used to buy stir-fried rice noodles at his stall every day, always extra chili oil, and he remembered. Old Pan brought the Yixing clay teapot he had used for over a decade, saying it was for Lu Chun to brew his tea. That jasmine tea of yours is terrible. I've got some real Tiguanyin here. Give it a try. Foreman Chun hauled over a steel-frame chair he had welded himself. The frame was made from discarded rebar from the construction site, the seat and backrest cobbled together from old formwork panels. It was rough but incredibly sturdy. He placed the chair right in the center of the office lobby, patted the backrest and said, "Back when you were hauling cement I told you. A man like you wasn't gonna spend his life on a job site. I welded this chair from our site's materials. You sit in it and draw. That way it's like the crew's still right there with you." Shen Duyan was the last to arrive. She brought no flower baskets, no champagne, none of the usual gifts for an opening ceremony. She brought only a pen, an old Rotring technical pen, its scale markings worn smooth, the red ring logo on the cap faded almost beyond recognition. It was the last pen Gu Chuetzin had used in his lifetime. Engraved on the barrel were 2 small archaic characters. Tianke. She placed the pen in Lu Chen's hand. Mr. Gu specifically mentioned this pen in his will. He said this pen had been with him for 40 years and drawn 11 super high rises, and every single line had been true to his conscience. He told me to give it to you the day you open your own firm. He said, "This pen now belongs to you. Use it to draw your own buildings." Lu Chen took the pen. He looked down at it for a long time, his thumb brushing back and forth over the 2 archaic characters on the barrel. The newly applied gold lacquer gleamed with a muted luster in the afternoon sun. He said nothing. He simply tucked the pen carefully into the breast pocket of his white shirt. That pocket was against his heart, right next to the gilded bronze badge. 1 year later, the Jianglan Center officially broke ground. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony, the sky over Jiangcheng was a spotless, cloudless blue. The red inflatable arch at the entrance to the site read Jianglan Center Groundbreaking Ceremony, in large characters, swaying slightly in the breeze. Lu Chun stood on the stage wearing a simple dark gray suit. In the breast pocket of his white shirt were 2 pens. One was the pen he had used himself for 6 years, its scale markings worn smooth. The other was the pen Gu Chuetzin had left him, engraved with Tianke. Beside him stood Shen Duyun, and an old woman in a wheelchair. His mother. His mother's coronary heart disease had been comprehensively treated at Fuwai Hospital in Beijing, and she had recovered well. She could now eat on her own and speak clearly again. She wore a deep red padded jacket, her hair combed neatly, her face full of joy. She looked at her son in his suit on stage, smiling, and then the tears began to fall. The tears and the smile mingled, tracing the lines of her face as they rolled down. She wiped them away with her sleeve over and over. Lu Chun picked up the shovel and turned the first shovelful of earth. The soil was loose. The spring earth energy was rising, and the freshly turned soil held a mix of last winter's withered leaves and newly sprouted blades of grass. The dead leaves were brown, the grass shoots pale green, the two colors tangled together so that it was impossible to tell the old from the new. He thrust the shovel into the earth and lifted his head, looking out at this patch of land where he had once knelt in the rain, fishing a badge out of the mud. In the distance, the red brick chimney of the old cotton mill still stood on the skyline, like a spine worn by time but still standing straight. He took the gilded bronze hexagonal badge from his pocket. The archaic character K on it had been retraced in gold lacquer by his own hand after Gu Chuetzen's death. Every stroke applied with excruciating care, filled in bit by bit with the finest lining brush dipped in gold powder paint. It had taken him an entire afternoon. Before the groundbreaking, he had deliberately taken it out of his innermost pocket and held it in his palm, looking at it for a long time. Then he placed it back in his pocket against his chest, the place closest to his heart. 2 autumns later, the Zhonglan Center was completed and passed its final inspection. The expert panel gave it a score of 97.3, the highest score in the history of super high-rise completion inspections in Jiangbei Province. In actual operation, the energy-saving efficiency of the wind pressure adaptive curtain wall system exceeded the design values by 12%. Liu Chan had left so much margin during the design phase that some had mocked it as wasteful, but the facts proved it was not waste, it was a reserve for the future. The International Architecture Review magazine Detail ran a 12-page feature titled, The Tower That Breathes, analyzing in depth the entire process of technical innovation from concept to completion. The article ended with this passage: Gu Chuetzen opened the door to ecological architecture in China. The one who truly walked through that door was Liu Chan. With a tower that breathes, he proved that an architect's hands can be broken, but an architect's pen, no one can break. Another half-year passed. Liu Chan and Shen Duyan went to Switzerland. Autumn in Liechtenstein was nothing like Jiangcheng. The air was crisp and clear. Mountains folded upon mountains in emerald green. The snowcaps of the Alps glittered under the blue sky. The small town was as quiet as a painting, its flagstone streets polished mirror-smooth by time. They found Gu Chuetzen's grave. It was in a small cemetery on the edge of town. The headstone was very plain, bearing no titles or honorifics, carved only with the archaic character K, and the dates of his birth and death. Before the grave lay a bouquet of dried white daisies. No one knew who had left them. It couldn't have been long ago, for the petals had not yet fully lost their color. Liu Chan crouched down and moved the dried bouquet to the side of the headstone. Then he took from his canvas satchel the gilded bronze hexagonal badge. The badge when Bojun had trampled into the mud, which he had fished out and retraced with gold lacquer. He placed it before the headstone, the character K facing up, directly across from the same character on the stone. He stood there for a long time. Shen Duyun stood 2 or 3 paces behind him, waiting in silence. The wind swept through the alpine valley, carrying the distant sound of church bells long and deep. Not until the bells fell silent did she gently tug at his sleeve. Let's go. There's still a lot to do. Liu Chan nodded. He bowed once more toward the grave, then turned and walked side by side with Shen Duyun out of the quiet cemetery. Behind them, the snowcaps of the Alps gleamed with an eternal light under the autumn sun. After returning from Switzerland, Liu Chan began to work on one thing. He would write a professional book on the design of ecological super high-rise buildings, making public all the design principles, calculation methods, and practical experience from every technical node in the Cloud Watchtower project. Not as a journal articles were too short to explain it clearly, but as a complete design manual, projected to be at least 600 pages when finished. He said to Shen Duyun, Mr. Gu gave me all his drawings back then not so I could lock them in a safe. In the profession of architecture, truly good things should be seen by more people. Mr. Gu taught me how to design a building that breathes. I should pass that method on to more people. Shen Duyun watched his silhouette bent over his writing in the drawing room of the office, the orange light of the desk lamp falling on his shoulders. This man's shoulders were broader now than when he had held up the patent documents at the Beijing Forum, and steadier too. Back then he had been a piece of rebar bent and then snapped back. Now he was more like the tower he had designed himself. Rooted deep in the earth, standing steady in the wind, breathing quietly. She walked up behind him and set a cup of hot coffee on the corner of his desk. The coffee steamed, its fragrance diffusing through the quiet drawing room. Who are you asking to write the foreword for the new book? Academician Chun. The old gentleman who stood up for me at the forum. I went to Shanghai last week to visit him and he agreed. But he made one request. At the end of the foreword, he wants to include the line from Mr. Gu's will. Lu Chun looked up, took a sip of the coffee, then set the cup back in its place. His finger lightly tapped the rot-ring pen Gu Chuetzin had left him. Let buildings breathe. Let truth stand. Another autumn came. On the third anniversary of the founding of Tianke Architectural Design Office, the team had grown from the initial 5 people to over 60. They had moved into the 3-story red brick building converted from the old cotton mill. Lu Chun and Shen Duyun stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of the observation deck, on the top floor of the Zhonglan Center. Outside the window was the skyline of Jiangcheng. A million lights spread into a warm sea in the autumn night, every lamp like a tiny breathing life. In the distance, the headlights on the Yangtze River Bridge were like a flowing string of pearls, stretching from the south bank to the north in an unbroken streaming current. The curtain wall system that had made him kneel in the rain to retrieve a badge, that had forced him to haul cement for 3 months, that had kept him drawing under a bare incandescent bulb in a low-rent apartment for countless deep nights, that system was now working quietly on every floor beneath his feet. The 4 annular air ducts slowly regulated the air pressure differential in the night wind, the 16 sets of louvers opening and closing like the gills of a fish. The people standing in the building felt no mechanical noise, only a very gentle, very even flow of air, as if the building were breathing on its own. This building breathes, just like its architect. Lu Chun gazed out the window, his hands in his pockets, his fingers unconsciously brushing the edge of the gilded bronze badge. The chip where the lacquer had been knocked off. He had never repaired it. Not because he forgot. He kept it. Kept that chip as a memory of the place from which he had crawled back up. Attorney Shen, when will the 3rd cohort of the Tianke Young Architect Support Initiative be announced next year? Next month. Applications this year were double last year's. Competition is fierce. The review committee is already working overtime going through the materials. Shen Duyun flipped open the calendar on her phone to check, then added, "Oh, there's an interesting applicant. A young designer from Wen Wanqing's firm. Just graduated this year. I looked at her portfolio, she's got real ideas, especially her understanding of small-scale wind environment simulation. Very fresh angle. Her application included a recommendation letter. The recommender is her undergraduate thesis advisor." Lu Chun turned his head to look at her. "What's her name?" "Zhang Xiaohe." "What does the recommendation letter say?" Shen Duyun pulled up the scanned copy of the letter and read the final paragraph aloud. During her undergraduate studies, this student demonstrated excellent performance, with independent thinking and a solid professional foundation. What is particularly rare is that she never avoids complex technical problems, and always maintains a fundamental inquiry into the essence of architecture. I believe she possesses the potential to become an outstanding architect. Lu Chun was silent for a moment. Outside the window, the river wind blew past. The curtain wall system adjusted the angle of its louvers in response, emitting a very, very faint mechanical sound. At her. Let her start from scratch. On her resume, include only the things she's done herself. He finished speaking, pulled his hand from his pocket, and absently drew a curve on the glass. The arc of the curve was smooth and steady, exactly like the first line he had ever drawn in that corridor apartment. Shen Duyun looked at his profile for a long time. Then she looked down and typed a line into the memo on her phone. 3rd cohort. Add Zhang Xiaohe. Approved by Lu Chun. After typing that line, she suddenly smiled. It was a faint smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling just slightly, not showy but warm. "You know what? You're the first client who's ever told me add someone. All my previous clients wanted to subtract." Lu Chun didn't answer. He just gazed out the window at that vast sea of light stretching to the edge of the sky. Beneath every light, someone was living their own life, busy with their own struggles. And the tower beneath his feet rose from that sea of lights like a silent spine, standing quietly on the banks of the Yangtze. The wind blew in from the river, carrying moisture and the distant low moan of a ship's horn. It passed through the 4 annular air ducts of the curtain wall system, slowly opening and closing, and was gently transformed into a steady, even current of air, brushing the cheeks of every person standing in the building. This building breathes. Its architect taught it how to stand in the wind, how to breathe in the wind, how, after having everything taken from it, to plant its feet back on solid ground, root deep and grow steady. Outside the window, the nightscape of Jiangqing was tender and vast. In the distance, the red brick chimney of the old cotton mill could no longer be seen. But the land at its feet was already nurturing new life.